here, Yaen. She is a fourth-year behavioral neuroscience major. She was a PAC fellow for second year, and she's currently a member of a few different organizations. But she's going to talk about navigating recovery from an eating disorder. So if we could welcome her as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Yaen, and to start off, I would like to give a trigger warning because I will be discussing eating disorders, weight, and calorie counting in my talk in depth. So if you're not comfortable with these topics, feel free to take the time you need to step outside and return in about 15 minutes when my talk is over. And before I begin, I would like to thank the Team PAC and the PAC co-chairs. It's such a privilege to be standing on this stage. I've watched so many amazing speakers in the past, and it means so much that I could be here today sharing my story. And with that, I'd like to begin my talk, and I'll be talking about my journey with my eating disorder and my recovery. Growing up, my favorite foods were handmade pork dumplings and Taiwanese scallion pancakes. To me, these foods symbolize love, family, and tradition. They were my mother's recipes, memories of my ancestors brought over when my parents immigrated to the US when I was only 2 years old. Love was synonymous with food. It was represented in the cut-up apples my mom brought me as I was up late studying, or the handmade buns my mom or my grandma packed me for lunch. It was a privilege to grow up in Southern California and to be surrounded by such a high Chinese population with an abundance of Asian grocery stores, restaurants, and representation of my culture. I was thankful to never be ashamed to bring rice or Asian snacks to school, and I easily found comfort in my racial identity as a Chinese American through my cuisine. In Mandarin Chinese, the term for mental illness, Shen Jingbing, translates to English as a disease of the nervous system. Shen is the word for God, and Jingbing translates to mind disease. The juxtaposition between a godlike mind and a disease, and the shame in a disease of the mind, was amplified by my experiences growing up as a Chinese American. This neutral medical term takes on connotations of fear and disgust in modern Chinese society, and it was always spoken in whispered tones by my family and my close relatives. So in college, I was determined to understand the brain after it was dismissed as unimportant for so much of my life, which is why I chose behavioral neuroscience as my major. And I also just didn't know what I wanted to do, but it all worked out in the end. When I moved to college located 3,000 miles away from my hometown in Southern California, the Chinese foods I ate growing up became even more treasured to me. I was happy to take the T all the way to Chinatown, stock up on Asian snacks, and feel the familiarity of speaking Mandarin in a Chinese grocery store. And after my first year of college, I developed a Shen Jingbing, bulimia. Bulimia is an eating disorder where one restricts their food intake due to an obsessive goal to lose weight. Unlike anorexia nervosa, which is a more stereotyped eating disorder, bulimia is followed by bouts of extreme overeating and self-induced vomiting, purging, or fasting to compensate. For me, it started when I discovered calorie counting online, and I became obsessed with eating as little as possible so that I could eat more the next day while still losing weight. I obsessively tracked every single bite I ate to make sure I didn't go over my calorie limit, which was the amount a toddler should have been eating, let alone a full-grown woman. This quickly transformed into extreme malnutrition and binge eating at night, followed by compensatory over-exercising to build up my calorie bank that determined how much I could eat, rather than relying on my own hunger and fullness cues. Losing weight was a way for me to finally conform to both Asian and American beauty standards, and for a few months it was really great. I was losing weight rapidly, and when my family and friends complimented my weight loss, it only reinforced my need to become as skinny as possible. My favorite dishes and snacks became vilified in my mind, and the food reminding me of home became nothing more than calories that I needed to burn off through over-exercising. But I was struggling with bulimia and remaining high-functioning. I was on a dance team and found myself disgusted with my body in the mirror during rehearsals. I became a co-fellow for the Pan-Asian American Council, where I learned about social justice and inclusion while ignoring my own restrictive behaviors. I was excelling academically and being productive in my research lab, all while scarfing down coconut energy clusters at midnight after not allowing myself to eat all day. I was severely depressed and anxious, but never dared to bring up my mental struggles to my family and friends out of complete embarrassment and fear. How could I be so high functioning, yet have no control over my eating behaviors? I invalidated my eating disorder, and every day became the same. I would eat everything in sight, feel shameful, starve myself the next day, rinse and repeat. No one knew about my eating disorder, and I felt so trapped in my own mind. I had no control over my binge eating disorders, and felt like I blacked out every time I binged. I lost my period due to malnutrition, and felt guilty every single time I ate. And this behavior just got worse and worse as I over-exercised less and binged more. With each pound that I gained, I felt like I was taking a step away from my ideal of beauty. Growing up, compliments of one's slim figure or thinness was all that I knew, especially because I was just chubby from a young age and was always judged for the amount that I ate, especially as a female. Asian culture is also extremely collectivistic, and this translates into a homogeneous beauty standard that favors pale skin, thin bodies, and no flaws, and it's impossible to achieve that. My recovery began when I discovered intuitive eating through TikTok, actually. I found creators such as Victoria Garrick and Brittany Lancaster on my For You page, and I binged less as I implemented food freedom and intuitive eating into my life. This was during the initial lockdown phase of the pandemic, and it actually forced me to reset and actively face my disordered eating that I had been repressing until then. With intuitive eating, the goal is to fuel your body when you're hungry and listen to your hunger and fullness cues to know when to eat and when to stop. And by giving into your cravings, your body will naturally recognize when it wants veggies, when it wants fried food, or when you just need a fun snack. Seeing these two women, who shared their own stories with disordered eating, among other creators, while having different body presentations, made me realize I was not alone in my struggles. I did feel really stupid, though, trying to relearn how to eat and listen to my hunger and fullness cues. But the hardest part of recovery was facing the triggering comments from others. It's unavoidable to hear about comments of other people's bodies, how amazing it was that someone had lost weight suddenly, and how great it was if someone ate nothing that day. These seemingly harmless comments contributes to a culture that encourages disordered eating, and made me feel even more insecure as I tried to fuel my body and recover. When I wondered why I was the one to struggle with a psychiatric disorder, the answer was clear. This behavior is just wired into my body. My ancestors did not live in a first world country with access to abundant food and survived by eating whatever food was available. I was astounded by the way genetics provides a blueprint for human behavior and how this is implicated in many neurological and psychological disorders. I was determined to study disordered eating due to my own struggles with bulimia, and after individually reaching out to eating disorder researchers in Boston, I established a new proposition with Dr. Lauren Breitloft, a clinical psychologist at Massachusetts General Hospital, where I work today. Here, I work on projects utilizing neuroimaging and data science to understand the pathology of eating disorders. I was incredibly shocked to learn about the biology of eating disorders and psychiatric illnesses in general. For example, in a study by Watson et al., they found that individuals with eating disorders have unique genetic predispositions. In their study, they discovered 8 genetic loci or regions that surpass genome-wide significance, and these are depicted in green in the image. These regions code for both metabolic and psychiatric functions and reinforces the underlying biological mechanism of eating disorders. Restrictive eating disorders also results in changes in the functional and structural patterns in your brain. For example, anorexia nervosa patients had different cortical thickness patterns in a study by Lavagnino et al. The blue regions in the brain represent regions with higher cortical thickness in anorexia nervosa participants, while the red regions represent lower cortical thickness in anorexia nervosa participants. Higher cortical thickness was absorbed in regions like the orbital frontal cortex, which is involved in sensory integration and taste and visual processing, as well as the insular cortex, which is involved in taste and homeostatic regions. Lower cortical thickness was observed through machine learning and revealed the superior frontal regions, which is involved in higher cognitive functions like working memory and executive function. This work absolutely blew my mind. It proved to me, and I hope to you all as well, that eating disorders are biological, and more work needs to be done to provide better treatment and diagnosis, which is what I personally hope to work towards, moving forward with data science and bioinformatics in my own academic career. And moving forward, I hope you all take away that everyone is going through their own mental struggles and they may not be voicing it. In order to remove the stigma from psychiatric conditions such as eating disorders, we need to normalize treatment and normalize the conversation about individual struggles. While one may not have an eating disorder, it has become impossible to avoid diet culture, where phrases like low fat and low carb have become buzzwords, weaponized by corporations to cause unnecessary fear when people are just trying to do what's best for their bodies. At the same time, we need to recognize and increase research on eating disorders. According to a study by Deloitte and Harvard, only $9 is spent on medical research for eating disorders for each individual with an eating disorder in the United States. That's barely enough to cover a meal, and that's how much is being funded for each individual with an eating disorder. My experience with an eating disorder has been the most difficult experience of my life, and I am still actively working to reframe my mindset around food every day. I encourage everyone here to reflect on unconscious ways that fat phobia and diet culture has contributed to the pressure to engage in disordered eating behaviors. For example, food does not need to be labeled as good or bad, and no one should feel guilty for something as necessary for survival as eating. Balance is key, and listening to what your body is craving and what it needs will prevent the unconscious restriction that could lead to disordered eating. Next, there is no need ever to comment on one's body or general appearance. Instead, focus on what people have achieved or done, or the choices they make rather than what their body looks like itself. Fat phobia is still rampant, and the way we praise skinny individuals while dismissing fat individuals has become normalized, especially with online content and celebrities. So I encourage everyone to do your part to call out any fat-phobic comments among your friends and family, because it has been so ingrained in our society that we don't even notice how this contributes to diet culture and dismiss these little comments. Next, it's important to recognize that health looks different for every single person, and creating standards of beauty limited to a certain size, certain amount of muscle, and certain weight range only contributes to the rise of eating disorders, which we've seen during the pandemic. At my lowest weight, for example, I was the most unhealthy I had ever been in my entire life, but everyone around me praised me as if I was making a change for my health. I've been working on body acceptance, where realizing my body is just nothing but a vessel for my actions and my work. Something that's helped me is realizing that when I'm 40, for example, I will look back and think, why didn't I appreciate my body when I was 20? And I personally don't want to spend my life worrying about my weight, when it's only a small component of my identity and who I am, and I can instead use my time to make the world a better place. Right now, I can easily dance, run, and jump, and one day my body will not be able to do these physical actions that I take for granted right now. If you or someone you know is struggling with an eating disorder, please take advantage of the resources, including the National Eating Disorder Association, or the National Association for Anorexia Nervosa and Associated Disorders, which both have hotlines that you can call to talk to someone who can help. If you are more inclined to learn about policies and how we can improve access to treatment of eating disorders at a legislative level, I highly recommend getting involved with the Eating Disorders Coalition for Research, Policy, and Action by following them on social media or signing up for their text alerts. Next, the Crisis Text Line is a 24/7 helpline for mental health emergencies, and you can even volunteer if you're interested. Project HEAL is another great resource with guides for treatment, and you can apply for financial support for an eating disorder. They also have a great blog with information about body image and breaking down eating disorder stereotypes, as well as support for recovery. And self-plug, if you're interested in contributing to research, my lab is conducting a study for females with restrictive eating disorders. We really hope to better understand how hormones, specifically estrogen, can provide a mechanism for improvement. And if you participate, you will be financially compensated, but it would mean more to help researchers such as myself and others improve how eating disorders can be treated and recognized. This is the first time I have publicly shared my journey, and I hope that I was able to provide a voice for those who may be in a similar position or have had similar struggles. My struggles with an eating disorder have been extremely difficult, but looking back now, I honestly don't know where I would be if I didn't have that experience to inform both my personal and my academic journey. I encourage everyone to continue working to dismantle the stigma around psychiatric conditions, such as eating disorders, and reflect on how we unconsciously contribute to disordered eating in society. Thank you so much for your time and for listening to my PACX talk.